required.
But now, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
Doom: The Dark Ages has a tough assignment. It's the third game in a trilogy following two modern masterpieces that revitalized and revolutionized single-player campaign shooters. But perhaps wisely, The Dark Ages seems to have totally dropped out of the arms race to make an even bigger and better sequel. In no way does it feel like it's trying to match Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. It feels blissfully content to recall the earlier games and do its own thing in its own little sandbox. Its story goes nowhere and really doesn't matter. Its action and exploration are fun, but drawn out across twice as much runtime as is interesting, and the game lacks any real crescendo, even when it sets itself up for incredible moments time and again. But that's not to say the Dark Ages isn't a whole lot of fun when it's doing its thing, so it ends up feeling like really good DLC instead of a standalone, stand the test of time experience. Now, I respect that id didn't give in to the pressure of trying too hard to pretend the game is something that it's not, but even the ideas it does commit to putting on screen feel bizarrely underdeveloped, like its shallow new mech and dragon sections. The Dark Ages may be the easiest Doom game outside of the originals to just pick up and replay and have a good time, but it's also the most easily forgettable game that id has ever made, and it spreads out the good parts so thinly that it dares you to stop caring at times. And I don't think anybody wanted or expected that. But let's get into the devil in the details and see if you feel the same way. So the first thing I want to highlight is the music by Finishing Move. I've heard a lot of people dog it, people like Dave Oshry that said it sounds super generic or even AI generated. Now, maybe this is because he's a good friend of Andrew Hulshult, who composed the majority of the music for the Ancient Gods DLC and many other things, but I must protest. Is the composition style much more conventional than Mick Gordon's? Sure. But what Finishing Move makes up for in innovation, it delivers in straightforward, satisfying crunchiness. Tunings, the edginess, and the straightforward enjoyableness of the compositions reminds me a lot of the kind of foot-stomping two-step that you get from old school meets new school types of metal bands like Demon Hunter. They employ some old school stringed instruments to add some more medieval texture to the metal melodrama. They're not afraid of crashing percussion either, and a lot of the songs are very drum-oriented. The tunings are through the floorboards low, and the strings buzz with gloomy, menacing import. Some of the game's best moments are when the music is driving the action, almost like it's the main character, not Doom Guy. Some of the music tricks where it lines up perfectly with the momentum of a fight ending is something special. Here are some of my favorite riffs. Now I could go on, but we'd be here all day. Not enough people are coming to Finishing Move's defense, so I just wanted to be upfront about how much I enjoyed it and how good I think it is. But The Dark Ages doesn't just sound great, it's no slouch visually either. The art direction is generally astounding, rich with medieval Gothic detail. We get to travel to a truly mesmerizing otherworld and even a very Bioshock 2 coded underwater world with lichen and shipwreckage everywhere. But the real star of the show are the background scenes where Titans fight Atlan mechs or enormous Lovecraftian creatures roam. It's truly epic, beautiful stuff. Every hallway is cavernous, every vista seemingly infinite, which looks and feels cool, but it tends to distract from the first-person nature of the thing by giving almost too much to see that even third-person games don't usually strive for. In a personal feeling genre like the FPS, it distances you from the action here. And this feeling carries over to the story too, where Doom Guy just feels like he's on autopilot, walking through scenes that he's not terribly interested in being present for. So the Dark Ages story, or what accounts for it, is not a good one, but it's not awful. It's fine. We're plopped down into the world of the human sentinel race, these Thor-like space Vikings, who are trying to stave off an invasion campaign from the demon prince Azrak and the minions of hell. We get to see a young King Novik, which is neat, but outside of seeing a pre-betrayer Valen, everyone else is new. including the Sentinel shifty ally, the Creedmaker, who seems very Jabba the Hutt coded. We get to see the first on-screen female character of note in Commander Thera, who winds up being a distressed damsel most of the game, and then the primary antagonist, Prince Azrak, his witch assistant, and some dude who needs to sue his dentist. Azrak is a classically evil villain, and he's a good bit of predictable fun as the guy after the MacGuffin that's gonna, let all hell run wild with their bad selves once he gets his hands on them. The human Sentinels aren't standing for it, and they're finding out that their alliance with the Makers whom they worship is becoming increasingly tenuous as their alliance with Hell is starting to flourish. For some reason, Doom Guy is held on a leash by the Sentinels and kind of unleashed like a rabid dog. Why I couldn't tell you, as he seems perfectly cooperative even after breaking free, but the plot seems only mildly interested in getting you super invested in anything but spectacle. It's never bad, and I enjoyed how most levels begin and end with a well-directed, pleasant enough to watch cutscene, but the dialogue is just generic, riddled with pomp and circumstance and jargon that's not even cheesy enough to feel like there's a committed style or camp intent here. Understated's probably a nice way to put it. And in many ways, that's just the Dark Ages MO, but it's also indicative of one of the game's most frustrating habits, making you think that more will eventually happen because not much has happened so far, and it feels like we're headed towards some big confrontation. So many times I thought something epic was about to happen, and then it would pull the narrative punch and totally drain out the momentum of the build-up, and thus any satisfaction. The whole game, while often fun, has this same feeling where it feels too easy and underdeveloped. But the Dark Ages does do a cool thing where it splits the difference between 2016 and Eternal. It generally lets you use whatever weapon you want to lean on and just asks that you adjust your strategy to the strengths and weaknesses of that weapon. You have some build diversity that'll really help you clear the higher difficulties, as the nuances of the weapon comes out pretty profoundly here. But generally speaking, the main game lets you just choose your favorite color projectile and click click boom. The game is not a great shooter because it's already a great shielder. Is that a term? Well, if not, it is now thanks to its software. So in a very Bioshock 2 kind of way, you're essentially dual-wielding the whole time, a shield in your left hand and a gun or melee weapon in your right. We are essentially heavy metal Captain America, able to throw our chainsaw-lined shield through hordes of guys as it auto-targets and cleaves them up for us, or it can be thrown into enemies to damage them in place while it buzzsaws them. Taking out shield guys like bowling pins once you've heated up one of their shields is super gimmicky, but it does feel good and makes you feel powerful. And the shield can even do cool things like grapple us up to high places or be used as a key to unlock new areas. The shield can even de-armor enemies, which is a strategic holdover from Eternal's weak point system. Although much the same as it was in Eternal, you're not required to do this in order to win battles, it just helps you beat them better, and who doesn't want to do that? All that to say, the shield is glorious to wield, an incredible innovation, visceral and fun to use, and that's not even mentioning its most important function, the parrying mechanic that informs almost every aspect of Dark Ages gameplay. So the Dark Ages digs back into the original Doom game's oeuvre by throwing fireballs at you right and left. Interacting with them operates on a red light, green light principle. Red projectiles have to be dodged or blocked with the shield, but green projectiles can be blocked with a timely parry and returned to sender to falter them, opening them up for counterattacks. And because so many of these attacks are coming from so many attackers, you're primarily worried about being on time with your parries like a clever counter-punching boxer. The game settles into this addictive rhythm where you're moving at a breakneck speed around large arenas, taking out hordes of enemies with player-empowering shield guys being undone by one throw in one moment, only to come back to your hand just in time to parry an attack or stun a big enemy for a follow-up melee attack or shotgun blast. The combat is the most immediately fun of the recent 3 Doom games, and the only one that I'm likely to return to just for shits and giggles. But while the game gets into the fun zone fast and often, it often doesn't do enough to differentiate fights from one another, so what you end up getting is a lot of these fights where the arenas are really big and give you lots of room to maneuver, and then you have these leader mini-bosses that come in there and are invulnerable until you've taken out all the other guys in the arena. It's a fun little bit of strategy, and it works pretty well, generally speaking. We get new versions of the Caco Demon and the Revenant, and finally an appropriate if stiff adaptation of the Imps, but the real focuses are the incredibly hardy and fun to fight Mancubi, and a host of new enemies like the Vagary Champion, who's an homage to the Vagary boss from Doom 3, the Beast Rider enemy, or this big guy with wings. While this is a lot to keep track of, how you interact with each of them is often too similar fight to fight. For instance, I was browsing through 15 hours of footage for this video and was amazed at how many fights looked and felt exactly the same. and how much I could cut out because I only needed so much for this video, and because there was only so much unique footage that really showed off any different weapons or abilities or any other strategies that were necessary or that I just happened to do. The one way that I can see the game extending its longevity is its difficulty-dependent mechanics and subtle nuances in buildcraft. Under the Mayo found out that Mancubi can start tanking missiles if you pause in the middle of a barrage for too long, undoing all the work that you did to soften them up to make them vulnerable to a finisher. Certain parries don't work on the winged demons either on Nightmare. But on the lower difficulties like Ultraviolence or Hurt Me Plenty like I played on, the game often doesn't do enough to incentivize you to use different weapons or to mod them in such a way that they feel that much more effective or ineffective beyond just dealing more damage or doing a different animation. I mean, weapons have upgrade trees and they give you quite a lot of different little minor abilities like stunning enemies or being able to break shields or what have you, and your melee attacks and shields also have their own dedicated upgrade trees, like the shield being able to do a different animation upon parry that maybe knocks back one enemy or spreads out a bunch of knives to hit multiple enemies, or an auto turret, but these really kind of feel like skin swaps. The melee also feels somewhat flat mechanically. So the combat really just boils down to doing cool stuff with your shield and softening people up in between shield operations with your right trigger. It's all fun, and holy fuck does it have that nice Bioshock 2 level feeling, even down to the shredder feeling just like the rivet gun. But there's a sameness that sets in too, and a lack of meaningful risk-reward to play with, despite how much the game wants you to grind for gold and upgrade tokens to really kit yourself out. The weapons just don't stand out enough. Skullcrusher variants feel rather weak without heavy investment. They don't feel much different from each other, and to be honest with you, the cool skull crushing animation that's supposed to happen is something you really don't even get to pay attention to because it's happening so far on the corner of the screen while you're trying to pay attention to everything in the middle of the screen. Same goes for the plasma variants, although I soon realized that the cool looking accelerator was just objectively worse on the damage output front than the much more boring cycler. Chain shot's a great slapstick weapon to just bonk dudes with the ball and chain, and the grenade launcher and the missile launcher are really effective and satisfying to wield. The BFG variant, called the BFC, or the Big Fucking Crossbow, is obscenely good though, and has amazing feedback. I'm just sad that I forgot I had it a lot of the time. As for the other weapons, the combat shotgun was pretty easily outclassed by the super shotgun, which is another point of contention. Its fire rate is heavily slowed compared to the previous games, but that's also because upgraded, it can basically damage even the highest tier enemies into executable states with 1 or 2 shots. It's preposterously overpowered and has no real downsides. Now, it's fun, drunk on power player placation, but it's not very good game design as it invalidates to an extreme extent almost the entire rest of the arsenal. I mean, you can use weaker, cooler looking weapons if you want, but you're essentially just opting into a more difficult version of the game you don't need to because of a lack of meaningful friction. You can also lean on the same gun infinitely, as refilling your ammo is as simple as melee killing a fodder enemy. This is an admirably unpretentious and unbothered design choice on id's part, and reflects the kind of design choice that, they want to bring down the barriers of entry that Doom Eternal had, but it does kind of spoil the player rotten instead of incentivizing just a little bit more complicated, more interesting ways to play. I both love and hate how easy the Dark Ages is compared to the previous 2 games. Now, I'm not a difficulty snob by any stretch. I'm not going to tell you skill issue or get good almost ever. I don't mind a game not punishing me very much, but if a game doesn't give me much resistance to playing the game the simplest and the most effective way, it can end up making itself a lot more boring by default. One of the criticisms of Eternal was that it was too prescriptive, which is only mildly true because you could pretty much just play it like a normal shooter, but you had some upside strategy things you could try, like blowing up weak points. One of my main criticisms of Doom 2016 is exactly this. That while you can more or less use any gun you want, you're never really incentivized to use any other gun over the other. And it's not that I want to be browbeaten to use a certain thing, but I also want to have some immersive reason why the things I'm using matter in this world, so it doesn't just feel like I'm just playing any old shooter that just lets me point gun at a thing and shoot it till it dies. But this is kind of a running theme with the Dark Ages. Its story is sort of fun, but it wastes so much time playing through 5 levels of something when 2 would suffice, and it makes the campaign much less replayable because of all the error. The combat is engaging and fun, but so many fights run together until the very end where waves of hyper-tough enemies really push you to perform better. Honestly, the harder the Dark Ages gets, the more fun it gets. For instance, the first 5 levels are incredibly slow and boring. Level 6 finally gets down to business and starts populating these big wide open areas with enough enemies, and they really start pushing you to survive. But it's these ebbs and flows that happen during the campaign that can make Doom Guy's admittedly wonderfully feeling speed and jump philosophy feel like a way to just speedrun past all the game's intentionally bloated design. Now, exploring and solving environmental puzzles is often great fun, much more so than the previous 2 games. I got a pretty big charge of figuring out a lot of these, like finding where in the level led up to that closed off thing in front of me, and then navigating the platforming challenges and hazards to get there. This is the one part of the game that felt objectively better than the last 2, but it does suffer from being the only thing justifying the level's wide openness for openness sake, which tends to make the game feel a lot longer and more padded out, and a lot less impactful as a result. But if all this seems a bit too negative, I'd like to provide a counterpoint to my whinging and bring in one of the hardest working men in the FPS aficionado space. Take it away, Ruby Ranger.
Oh man, you kids made a mistake in letting me buy this game. Holy shit. Oh man. Okay, so there's a lot of discourse surrounding Doom: The Dark Ages and whether or not the game's combat has been dumbed down. But I'm here to tell you kids that that is simply not the case. I have a lot of things to say about the story of the game, but Medium didn't invite me on the show to ramble about the messiness of how Dark Ages' plot is basically Vin Diesel's Conan the Barbarian. So without further ado, give me the soapbox and I'll talk about combat. Calling the combat of Dark Ages dumbed down or simplistic feels like it thoroughly brushes past the elegant depth that the combat mechanics provides. Where Doom Eternal asked players to consider every weapon in their arsenal and to min-max the strengths and weaknesses of each one during combat, the Dark Ages refuses to make us use every gun in our pockets. Instead, it opens up the toolbox and asks which of these works best for you. Some of the weapons and their upgrades allow for more defensive playstyles, while others lean into more offensive playstyles. What we have here is a viciously deep system for creating a player build that maximizes the power fantasy that Doom can provide. Sure, we essentially get 7 ranged weapon types and 3 melee weapon types, but diving deeper, we actually have 12 ranged weapons, 3 melee weapons, and the shield itself, which has 4 separate runes for powering up what happens when we parry incoming projectiles. Each weapon has different upgrades which cause different kinds of what I'm going to call elemental damage. Each elemental damage is going to affect enemies in different ways, from dropping armor, to dropping health, to stunning them so that they're more vulnerable to incoming damage. And then there's the shield itself, which can be used to bash demons, stun them, and parry incoming fire. As you unlock more upgrades and more weapons, you can continuously fine-tune your experience to fit your personal playstyle. You can use every weapon in the toolbox, or you can completely ignore some of them. Everything here is balanced so that you can go in swinging however you like and come out smiling. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that I saw the full potential of the combat systems and each weapon immediately. It really took me a second to appreciate the Ravager, for example, which is the second of the 2 skull-crushing weapons. There's already the Accelerator and the Cycler energy weapons for rapid-fire munitions, as well as the Shredder, so having the skull-crusher weapons felt like just more of the same, you know what I mean? But then again, we've had plasma rifles and chain guns in the same arsenal before, so let's look past that. The Ravager is truly something special. Firstly, the Ravager operates by having a much more focused stream of fire than its counterpart, the Pulverizer, and it takes a minute for the weapon to hit maximum firing rate. So it might not seem like a great weapon to invest in at first. However, the weapon's first upgrade is called Vampirism, and it makes enemies hit by the weapon at max firing rate drop health on the ground. Stellar work. Next, you can choose to upgrade the weapon again with either Ignition or Slow Burn. One of those makes it so that it takes less time to hit max firing rate, and the other increases the max firing rate, but makes it take longer to get there. This one you can choose between at any time, so experiment. But the final upgrade makes it so enemies hit at max firing rate also drop Ravager ammo. Upgrading this fully makes it so that when this puppy is fully cooking on the battlefield, you are literally just crafting health and ammo without interruption. I used this weapon exclusively on the final boss because I was tired of his bullshit and I cackled with glee every time he took a swipe at me because I would literally just soak up all the health and ammo that I was milking from him and just continuously fire. It was one of the best times I've ever had with a boss fight, and while I could have chosen to have a more intricate and complex interaction with his encounter, I was genuinely engaged and shouting and could not have asked for a better way to end the game. Look, Doom Eternal completely changed the landscape of first-person shooters. In the 5 years since it released, we've seen increasingly more and more complex movement shooters hit the landscape and ask us to challenge ourselves even more. Ultra Kill, Viscera Fest, Killbug, the list goes on. And while not all of these games were directly influenced by Doom Eternal, it was still a pioneer. But strictly by comparison, Dark Ages' combat looks slower, more simplistic, and less intricate by nature. This, I think, is simply because we've been pushing ourselves to move faster and swap faster and chain combo faster and faster over the last 5 years. And Dark Ages is now asking us to just stand and fight. Get in there, get dirty, get hit, and fight. This is a return to and a refinement of classic FPS gunplay of the highest quality, with stunning depth and options to choose exactly how you want to go about it. In the Dark Ages, you don't have to play the game any way other than the way you want to play it. The only thing it asks you is to stop and consider your options. Alright, Medium, I've sponged up enough of your runtime. I'm going to turn it back over to you, and I'm going to get back to playing some more Dark Ages. Those Chivos are calling my name. Stay hydrated, kids.
I can appreciate that perspective, and it's certainly possible that I'm being a little too harsh on a game. But now that we've talked about that, I want to turn your attention to the new stuff that Dark Ages has added to the formula, and that's the Dragon and the Mech stages. These got pretty maligned in the pre-release press, but I don't think they're as bad as people say. They're just not as good as they should be. So the Dragon controls pretty well, and it's fun to swoop around the huge environments. Admittedly, the parry-based flight combat, where you essentially get sucked into a target-locked duel where you've got to successfully dodge attacks to charge them up and retaliate, is a bit awkward and repetitive, but it's fine. The mech battles seem very Titanfall-esque, but they're not terribly good because they're fairly undercooked and on rails. Kind of just mash the attack button, maybe dodge once, and then pull off a finisher, and then you do the same thing on every other enemy. Cool looking, I guess, but deathly simplistic and kind of spammy. There's just this air of this game being high-functioning DLC kind of done on the cheap by a B team, despite the team being more or less the same, at least in its leadership. Now, the Dark Ages often looks and sounds and plays pretty great with a crazy enjoyable new shield mechanic. But anytime it threatens to really take off and set itself apart and capitalize on all of its baseline good ideas, it just pulls the punch and never quite commits to being great. The mech and dragon sections are almost identical, the whole game and feel kind of cheaply done and lazily implemented. The exploration's fun and rewarding, but if you played one of these open levels, you played them all. Weapon balance is really inconsistent, as some guns are just awful, and the super shotgun is honestly just too good at the expense of all the other weaponry. The game's set pieces are often dead ends too, not leading up to big boss encounters that you think would be coming, although admittedly the last 2 levels do a pretty good job of jam-packing everything. The Dark Ages kind of feels like a jam session, like people got in the studio to just record some fun they were having instead of trying to make the next big hit. It feels like they're clearing out a binder full of old, unused ideas that they've wanted to get to from the last 2 games but just couldn't. On the one hand, I love that id seems a bit unbothered about the pressure to make this the best Doom game of the 3 or, ever, and they just commit to making a repeatably fun game at its base level. But there's so many times when you can see the team just not fully committing to making things feel more than cool at face value. It very much feels like the first Doom game that's been made for Game Pass day one. There's a lot of bloat, there's a lot of copy and paste going on here, and it's just an unfortunate thing to have to say about Doom, recently anyway, been a very crafted, intentional feeling experience. It's just frustrating that a game this good at its base level didn't strive for more when it seems so attainable, so within reach. Maybe it's missing the point to expect id to make a generational banger every time out, as the Dark Ages feels more like a victory lap for a studio that has nothing to prove. But I can't help but wonder what could have been if id had been striving for greatness here instead of just good enough.
We should focus on breaking the humans first. Then resume our search.
So if you're enjoying the channel and want to help it get to the next level, please consider becoming a patron or a channel member. By doing so, you'll be shouted out in the credits of every video, get early access to new videos, receive game keys as available, and even be able to vote or contribute to upcoming projects. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, these people thought so, and I have to thank them very much for their generous support. Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, Yak Show, M, Bibby F. and Bloxburg, Melancholy Geek, Garrison, and an extra special shout out to those contributing to my highest paid tiers, James Wyatt, and the Nth Review. And if you're not tired of me by now, check me out on the Quad Damage podcast with Deadforge and Robert Yap as we talk first-person games with developers and content creators alike. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon.